Hey there folks, how's it going? SociopathicOtter here, and it's time for some more Chrono Trigger. You get it? Time travel. I just want to take a moment to kind of savor this music, because the developers worked so hard on creating very specific tones, and putting very specific feelings into their music in such a way that Chrono Trigger feels more like an artful experience than it does a linearly shaped RPG. So, it brings to mind a story that I read somewhere, maybe YouTube, maybe Reddit, whatever, where Yasunori Mitsuda, the soundtrack developer for this game, he actually developed stomach ulcers because he worked on the soundtrack so hard. And when I read that, at first I thought, oh my god. And wow, these blue eaglets really have no HP. And the next thought that came to my mind was, this soundtrack is so good. And obviously it's not worth a man's health, but it makes sense why each theme feels so individual, and why each tune feels like it contributes to the beauty of the whole. I feel like out of the big three for the SNES, Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy VI, and Earthbound, Chrono Trigger is the best. And okay, is nobody gonna equip that Titan Vest? Okay, Luca can. Cool. So I feel like that's the case because Chrono Trigger does something that the other two don't, and that's excelling at everything. I don't know why I actually left the forest, because I actually need to grind Luca's experience points here until she actually gains a technique that'll be useful for the next boss. So, Chrono Trigger tries to do everything well, and I think it does end up doing that. It succeeds in that endeavor. Chrono Trigger actually had a production team that was called the Dream Team. I don't remember the specifics, but basically, the guy from Dragon Quest, the guy from Dragon Ball, and a couple of other really cool developers got together and said, hey, we're going to make this a fantastic game. I think it was originally supposed to be a Final Fantasy sequel, or at the very least some installment in that franchise. And you can really see the Final Fantasy vibes in this game, but it feels so much more individualistic and so much more polished than that. It also explains why Chrono's portrait looks a lot like Dragon Ball characters, because Yuji... oh goodness, what's his last name? Well, the guy who worked on Dragon Ball's portraits actually worked on Chrono's as well. There we go. That's what I was waiting for. So, I don't know why they learned Fire Sword so early. It's supposed to be a mid-game tech. But I got the tech that I needed, so I'm good to go. Just like single techs in this game, where Chrono uses Cyclone and kind of takes out enemies in an area of effect, you can work with party members in this game to actually use dual techs. So I'm going to show that off in the next location, right after I go heal at the inn. One thing that I find really marvelous about Chrono Trigger, like I was saying earlier, is the fact that everything that it does well. So, Earthbound does a lot of things very, very well. For example, some of the game mechanics that it pioneers and some of the feelings that it evokes are extremely powerful. Final Fantasy VI, the last game in the trio of SNES classics, had a fantastic story, fantastic character development, and generally tried to create a narrative within a video game, which was something that was rather uncommon for the times. Chrono Trigger doesn't do that. What it does is it tries to excel in everything, and unlike the vast majority of things, Chrono Trigger actually succeeds in that endeavor. Because this is the inn, that's great. That's not why it succeeds. Chrono Trigger does everything above average, I think. The gameplay is super duper compelling, and it knows exactly when to stop so as to maximize its yield. The story isn't super duper special, but it definitely gets you invested, it definitely helps the characters grow, and it does so in a way that's compelling for you, the player, to actually instigate it. And everything else, the graphics from the intricate portraits that are inspired by Dragon Ball in the menu screen, to the funny little dialogue, to the funny little characters, to the beautifully styled music, to the random details between time periods, everything that Chrono Trigger does builds towards a cohesive experience. And that experience, to me, is just as good a work of art as anything Mozart or Picasso ever made. So, we've got a cathedral here with a nun standing by the piano, or I think it's an organ, actually. It looks like you could use some food and a place to rest. Hey, I'm no puff man, I don't need to rest, but what I do need is to investigate shiny objects when I see them. That's Guardia's royal crest. And now, the nuns burn in the fire of sinners. Just kidding, I just wanted to say something kind of spooky like that. Not necessarily Halloween, but still pretty interesting. So, what you want to do with these guys is basically fire whirl as many of them as you can. Usually you can only get 2, but I'm sure speedrunners have a trick for getting 3. And you want to really just spam dual attacks because of that. If you attack them normally, it's not a good time. Great. So I'm fine with that. We'll just fire whirl and get it done. Great. Oh wow, Luca got 2 level ups in a row. That's pretty awesome. So now we've got a 5th sinner in the fires of hell. And we've got a chocolate chip mint frog. Nice! I like that. He looks good. Mint chocolate chip frog. I'm liking it. Chrono, it's a talking frog. I hate frogs. I like the fact that Luca just breaks the laws of physics as she sees fit. And she sees a frog and says, "Oh my god, this doesn't make sense. Somebody call God." What happens if you say refuse? I don't want to risk it because this is such an open world game. Or at the very least, the mod is open world. What's your name? So, his name is Frog, but I'm actually going to name him Glenn. So that's spelled Glenn. Minor spoilers here, because the castle was talking about Magus a little while back. So Magus is this evil sorcerer who's the antagonist in a little bit, and he actually turns Glenn, who's a knight, into Frog. I feel like if I turned into a frog, and I had human-like senses of speech and individuality, I would want to be called by my real name, SociopathicOtter, and not necessarily Frog. So, Lucas says, "Alright, that's cool, we'll humanize you, Frog." His name's Glenn. Cool. That's one of the 2 name changes I like to make. So, the other one will come later. Alright. Play the piano. So today I learned you can play so awfully on the piano that doors will just spring out of oblivion. Also, I really like this picture. I caught the habit in my Aria of Sorrow Let's Play to actually notice really small visual details and kind of nitpick them. It has these kinds of roses at the bottom, so you have this kind of natural element to it, and then the angel is rising from nature. I don't know if that's some social commentary or if I just nitpicked a very, very small detail, but here we are, the first dungeon in the game. So we got a shelter and a tonic, and we also got these enemies. So this is actually where my experience deviates from the norm here, because I'm actually not sure what this game is going to do in terms of letting me explore the world openly. So obviously right now I don't have open access to go wherever I want, right? I'm stuck in this time period until I go through the main quest. But later, how's the game going to open up? Where am I going to be able to go without getting the right story triggers done? And what tech did I just learn? Oh my goodness, this is so awesome. Frog just learned a tech that will actually let me heal HP. I think he does learn it, but he learns it at a later level in the vanilla game. So I am really, really liking this randomizer. It's called Wings of Time, by the way, which is a name that's pretty funny and pretty well put, because there's actually an element in this game called the Wings of Time that comes in later, much later. But it's a witty little name. You're humans, they're hiding the queen in the back. It's a witty little name, and I really love the quality of life gameplay improvements that this hack is actually putting in. So, In Chrono Trigger, I feel like one minor complaint that I have is the fact that you have to do a decent amount of grinding if you're not naturally good at strategy in RPGs, and so you kind of have to grind and do a lot of side quests to actually beat the game. So, for reference, I've beaten the game once, and I am at the final boss in 3 other save files. So, it's not necessarily... Or is it 2 other save files? I'm not quite sure. Some number greater than 1. But the point is, I really appreciate what this hack is doing in terms of eliminating the need for grinding. Rescaling levels so that you don't need to grind and you can actually just go through the story and enjoy the meat of the game. And it lets you use techniques as they come up, rather than barring them behind arbitrary hour counters or level instances. So, triple techs are a great example of that, where I actually have an ability that I shouldn't have until I'm 60 to 70% in the game, but I already have it. This is the first dungeon. So I'm really excited for this quality of life hack. Thank you, person who made Wings of Time, and I'm pretty excited to see where it goes from here. Cool. So, Luca actually has a lot of HP because of that silver earring, which is something I'm really, really excited about. So, typically she acts as kind of a squishy mage archetype character, but because I can't unequip the silver earring quite yet, she's going to be a bulky mage, which I am definitely a fan of. I love bulky mages. Great. Can I get past here? No? I'm going to have to fight them? That's fine. Okay, so we're up against these Nashers. I could theoretically have Cyclone, and maybe that would have been a little quicker, but part of the experience of Chrono Trigger is just button mashing and getting through the fights. And experiencing this wonderful music. I think that's quite enough experiencing the wonderful music. But my point is, so many attributes of this game are so well done that it really impresses me. Like this room. Hey, what's with the disguise? No need for him here. So, Chrono Trigger is such a whimsical game. When I mentioned the tiny little details, this is actually one of them. So, we have this room of monsters who are just chilling, having a feast, hanging out with their pals. It's almost my shift. I hate pretending to be human. It's so repulsive. Even the monsters have personalities, and the dialogue is totally and completely hilarious. Oh man, I love games that kind of flesh out the antagonists, or even goons, totally unimportant characters, and make them a little bit more humanized. Full tonic, awesome. And mid tonic, awesome. That's weird. So I thought this guy was gonna start attacking me and say, why don't you rest here in a nice pretty little container of meat? Oh, just kidding. They are gonna attack me. Yeah, I was thinking, this is kind of unusual. Great. So I'm gonna actually try out Delta Storm and just kind of see what it does. Oh, it's gonna destroy my my MP. Never mind. I'll try out Delta Storm after I get to a decent part in this dungeon. Okay, awesome. So while I'm here, I guess I can talk about something else that Chrono Trigger does that I really appreciate, which apparently I've been talking about a lot in this in this game so far, but I think that's more to do with Chrono Trigger's massive, massive successes than it does to do about my repetitive praise for this game. So one thing that kind of bugs me in shows, or any piece of media in general, is when characters are held as expendable, and main characters are either hypocritical in terms of not recognizing those goons or those irrelevant characters, or situations where it kind of destroys the internal logic of the character's principles in a way that really takes away from the immersion of the character. So, I know that sounds pretty abstract. Let me see if I can phrase it a different way. So, for example, in Avatar, Aang is a character who is very, very against killing, right? He believes in the principles of pacifism, vegetarianism, and generally tries to be a decent person because he believes strongly in that principle. So, when Aang goes into the Avatar state, and he actually destroys a whole bunch of no-name Fire Nation goons, he doesn't feel a thing after that. And that kind of bugged me until I gave it some thought, and I realized, well, okay, maybe Aang isn't necessarily in control, maybe his conscience isn't necessarily dictating his actions at this time, so I can let that one slide even though it kind of irked me. There are other instances too, like in Hunter x Hunter, when Gon sees people die all around him in the exam, he doesn't care, but the smallest slight to his friends, and he is in a frenzy. And even that one admittedly has some logic behind it, which is that Gon cares very strongly about people who he's close to and his friends, but he grew up in nature, so he doesn't really care about the brutal, harsh side of life, which is fair. I can appreciate that argument. But there are also other instances of media where it's very one-dimensional, and characters can kind of contradict themselves. I already talked about Hunter x Hunter and Avatar, but I kept thinking of an example that would kind of highlight what I was talking about, where the goons and the superheroes or supervillains that the protagonist has to fight are actually held in distinct ways, regardless of both being on the same moral caliber. So the example hit me pretty quickly, and that it actually applies to Batman. So Batman and the Joker have this really interesting dynamic where Batman has a chance to kill the Joker time and time again, yet he never actually does. And some maintain that Batman never kills the Joker so as to maintain his standards, so as to maintain his ethics, because he's afraid of what happens if he breaks those ethics. Even for the Joker, this vile, contemptible human being who plays around with human life as though it were worth nothing, Batman still doesn't think killing is the right option. And if he were to kill the Joker, he doesn't know what he would do to criminals who could better defend themselves than the Joker could. And so I find that it's really interesting how all three of these media that I listed actually have situations where their main characters kind of avoid the discrepancy between killing random goons and killing the big bads. But I find that it's interesting that out of 4 examples, Chrono Trigger and the 3 on screen, not one has a reasonable distinction between the two in a way that's bad storytelling rather than simply an extension of the narrative or the psychology of the characters. So this is actually a really interesting experiment. I'm glad I did this section of the video because you learn something new every day, right? So I can kind of come through here and explore this dungeon even more. Got one shelter, and the floor is collapsing under our feet. Hey, buddy. No, stop it. I said that you can't take my cinnamon rolls. This guy's like a guard in Skyrim, right? So who took my sweet roll? I also love the little sounds, the sound effects that come when you go through the menus. It might just be because I really, really like this game. It is my favorite game. But the tiny, tiny little details are things that make me grin. Like a 5-year-old being presented with a cup of applesauce for the first time. Great, so we've got a couple of henches, and we've also got a vampire bat. So I'll have Chrono take care of the henches. Hopefully he should be able to OHKO. Okay, I guess he can't. That's okay. I guess that's what I deserve for bringing Pokemon terminology into an action RPG. Great. So hopefully that should take care of it. Does Frog need to heal anybody? I guess not. Great. So now we can just take care of this mad bat. This rabid bat. Which sounds like a job for an animal exterminator and not 2 kids and an anthropomorphic frog, but whatever floats this game's boat. Okay, cool. We got some items here. Not necessarily super useful, but not necessarily bad either. And let me go ahead and read this. Note, no entry. Very helpful. Alright, let's go ahead and attack these guys as well. Chrono Trigger has 2 battle themes, I'm pretty sure. Or, at the very least, it has a battle theme A and a battle theme B. I'm not quite sure how to distinguish them. But whenever I hear this theme, It's just awesome. It makes grinding actually kind of interesting, kind of fun. It is brainless, which I try to avoid in RPGs, and that's one of the reasons I really appreciate this ROM hack, because it means that I don't have to grind, and it makes the game a little bit more intellectually stimulating, a little bit less brainless. But I don't even mind grinding in this game as much as in other games because of the music. That's how good it is. And our characters strike a little pose, and we move on. And that's yet another interesting mechanic, actually, that I just noticed because I was looking at Chrono's victory pose. That the characters actually don't go into a battle screen, like pretty much any other RPG. Earthbound, the Mother series at large, actually. Golden Sun, what are some other RPGs? Pokemon, perhaps? And Dragon Quest games in that mold. They all have, Final Fantasy is another great example, they all have a system where you kind of transition into a battle world and a dungeon world. So after you beat the battle, your character strike a pose and you return to the dungeon world. When you encounter a monster, you have some screen change, some dramatic music play, and you're in the monster world. Chrono Trigger? Oh sure, now I hit the menu instead of pause. Chrono Trigger has no such distinguishing factor. It always stays in that one world, in the dungeon world. And it doesn't actually make you feel like you're playing a video game. It makes you feel more like you're playing through this kind of artistically inclined, well-coded adventure. So, I really appreciate those tiny little touches because they make Chrono Trigger feel extra polished. Okay, so this is getting kind of hairy. Well, it's not actually, I have a lot of HP, but I am getting unpleasant sounds from these henches, so I'd like to be able to cyclone fast if I can. Great, that's that. And then I should be able to attack these Diablos as well. Wonderful. So that's that. And then we can get rid of that one Diablo. Diablo 2, Diablo 3, right? So now only Diablo is left to the original game. And that's that. Great. Glenn leveled up. And we got a Pico Magnum. So is that like a small magnum? It's like a small gun? I guess so. Okay, karate gis aren't super useful. Great. Anything for Glenn? Nope. So, one thing that's interesting, maybe this is my false perception, or maybe... Do I want to increase speed? I'll increase speed. This might be my false perception, but it also might be a feature of the randomizer, that it doesn't actually tell you what unique item you get. Ooh, organ music. The randomizer doesn't actually tell you what item you get. It tells you what item the vanilla game would have given you. And then, oh goodness gracious, I hope that I could avoid that battle. Time to show off the runaway feature. So we're just filling up an imaginary, yet still significant time bar where I'm holding runaway, and it finally fills up and I can escape. But, like I was saying, what in the world was I saying? I have honestly forgotten at this point, because I was thinking about that imaginary time bar. The thing that I was saying is that the randomizer is coded interestingly, in the sense that it either shows you what item the vanilla game would have given you, but instead gives you the randomized item, versus just giving you the randomized item and showing that in the text. I'm not 100% sure which it does, because I don't really pay attention when I get items. Maybe I should, but I don't. And so that'll make an interesting part and an interesting segue in the next episode. So that's pretty much it for this episode, I think. It was fun going through Yakra's castle. That's the dude I'm going to fight at the very end. And it was interesting to see how all the quality of life features kind of combined to make this part of the dungeon even more interesting and even more exciting an introduction to the world than it is in the general game. So that's pretty much all I've got for this episode. If you liked the video, maybe consider liking, sharing, commenting, subscribing, and all that usual jazz. I especially like comments because, talking about Chrono Trigger is something that I'm very good at, and if you've got any comments, I'd love to hear them. I think that's pretty much it. Peace.